Want to know why? Ask how. Howard the Humongous. Will this continue to be an astonishingly peaceful presidential election season? Or is this just the calm before the storm? We've had inklings for months that this might be the most violent presidential election in modern American history. Each side said the results would be apocalyptic. According to mailings from President Trump, Donald Trump Jr., and Lara Trump, a Biden win would usher in a communist takeover, radical socialism, American decline, and the destruction of the American dream. According to Biden supporters like me, a Trump win could easily have installed Donald Trump as dictator for life and destroyed America's constitutional democracy. Former Trump campaign head Brad Parscale even bragged over the summer about a Trump dynasty in the hands of President Trump's children. So the stakes have been extremely high. Meanwhile, Republicans imagined that if Biden won, major cities would be taken over by Antifa and Black Lives Matter rioters, burning buildings to the ground. And Democrats have predicted that Trump armies with automatic weapons would take to the streets and that militia groups would aim for the civil war that they've preached for the last 40 years. But in reality, the week of the election, almost nothing horrible happened. In Detroit, the day after Election Day, a number of approved vote count watchers were excluded from the room where Detroit's ballot count was taking place. Republicans claimed that folks from the Trump side were being locked out. That wasn't true. There were between 134 and 227 officially credentialed Republican observers roaming the room at all times, depending on the hour of the day or night. Yes, at the very moment when it was being claimed that Republicans were not being allowed to observe, well over 100 Republicans were observing in Detroit alone. So why the phony claims? The room had become overpacked, and in the time of COVID, that can be lethal. So there was a spillover of accredited observers from both the left and the right. More wanted to get in the room than there was room for. And some of that Republican spillover said harsh words and made even harsher allegations. Allegations that would eventually be repeated by President Donald Trump. But that's not all. Democratic groups afraid that Trump would steal the election planned roughly 100 demonstrations, but the numbers of protesters who appeared in the streets from coast to coast were small and remarkably calm. And Republican groups like Stop the Steal mobilized hundreds of pro-Trump protesters to demonstrate in the streets of towns from Colorado Springs, Colorado, Terre Haute, Indiana, and Boise, Idaho, to Lansing, Michigan, Austin, Texas, and Albany, New York. But the real action was in lawyers' offices, in a handful of press conferences, and in Donald Trump's tweets. Within 3 days of the election, the Trump campaign had filed at least 7 lawsuits in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan, and had demanded a recount in Wisconsin. Rudy Giuliani threw 2 press conferences to say that late and absentee ballots might be coming from Mars, or might not even be ballots at all. And the president asked in a tweet, how come every time they count mail-in ballot dumps, they are so devastating in their percentage and power of destruction? There's an answer to the president's question. Mail-in ballots were so devastating because Democrats believe there is a COVID pandemic and played it safe by voting early and voting by mail. And mail-in ballots appeared in counting rooms so late because Republican politicians had mandated that early and mail-in ballots be counted late. What's more, the president had urged his followers not to be intimidated by the coronavirus, but to go to the polls on Election Day, which means that President Trump's votes were counted first. And it means that by Republican mandate, the Democratic votes that upset the president so much were counted last. It also means those mail-in and late ballots were still being counted days later. But the most astonishing story was voter turnout. The early and mail-in ballot total was over 100 million, the biggest in American history. That's double the total in 2016. The Republican Insider's publication, The Hill, said that Joe Biden has won the most votes of any presidential candidate in history, with close to 75 million so far. The previous record was Barack Obama's 69.4 million votes in 2008, and Fox News added that President Trump racked up close to 71 million, which means that Trump too broke the Obama record. In other words, this was a remarkable election. But it was not a violent election. At least not so far. This is Howard Bloom speaking to you from the future. It's your job and my job to make. Or, want to know why? Ask how. And now for the sleazy, slimy, sneaky little off button.